All right. So, boom. Here is the. Just make sure this is going. All right. Here's the link to the YouTube. What DAW you're using? Pro Tools, obviously. It worked fine in Ableton, but I think Pro Tools, it needs like a hard restart for the entire system. So I'm not going to do that while we're on Zoom. But there's the link to YouTube in the chat. I'll see you guys there. You guys know the deal. All right. Oh, Ali first. Very interesting. Took Alan's title away from him. All right. Okay. Ooh, audio patch. It's good to get that every now and then when shit's not working. Here we go. Make sure you guys can actually hear me, right? That's one of the most important things. Here we go. All right. All right, so you guys can hear me, I assume. Yep, okay. Video input device, video capture, existing, device one. Test, test, test. All right. What's going on here? Test, test, test. I'm just checking out something. Give me a second, guys. Today is just a weird day, huh? Hey, whoa, I'm all big and shit. There it is. Not sure what was going on there. Sorry about that. All right, now we are back in official business. No sound. It's a full. If you can't hear me properly, it might be because you're still on Zoom, right? If that's the case, feel free to get off of Zoom and just come back when we're done with the... It's a full moon? No. All right, so you guys should be able to hear me. So let's start talking a little bit about Elastic Audio, right? Now, I'm not going to go into the full details because it makes way more sense once you can actually understand MIDI, or not really, but it makes a little bit more sense once you understand MIDI. So for the meantime, I'm just going to go over some basics of Elastic Audio. Now, something that you might have noticed, and let's stick to this just fine session because there's less tracks in there and we don't have to deal with so much bullshit. Right? So something that you might have noticed is that whenever you create a new track, right, there's always this thing called samples, because we've only been dealing with like audio tracks and aux tracks and things like that, and master tracks. Now you might be wondering, well, what the hell is samples, right? And I kept telling you, like, just trust me, it's all samples. You might be wondering, well, what's ticks as opposed to samples? Now this is where the idea of Elastic Audio comes in, or it starts to surface, right? When you create an audio track, you're telling Pro Tools that, hey, whatever clip is on this track, I want you to analyze it in terms of samples. Now, we already know that when you create a 44,100 sample rate session, that audio is being collected at 44,100 samples per second. So your sample rate determines how many samples per second are taken in order to represent the audio, right? Analog to digital. So when you say create an audio track of samples, it's saying that, okay, when I track this audio, or when I observe this audio, it's being observed as samples, right? And how many samples? Well, 44,100 per second, right? Because that's our sample rate. However, you can see that on every track, right? there's a little clock sign right here, a little blue clock. And when you click on it, you have the option to actually change it from samples to something called ticks, right? Which is the other option that is available. Now, ticks is actually something that is based more on, based more for MIDI tracks, and it's something that we use more in MIDI, and it'll make sense once I get into MIDI. Samples is more for when we're doing audio stuff. But if you've ever thought about, hey, I want to actually stretch and compress audio in a similar way to MIDI, well, that's what ticks and Elastic Audio in general allows you to do. So when an audio track is in samples, every single point of audio is always considered with respect to the absolute time of a session. So what do I mean by that? Let's actually go even more basic. I'm going to go super basic for this one. I'm going to create a new session, call it Elastic Audio Basics, right? Because even that might be too much right now. Don't save, didn't do anything to it. So first thing I'm going to do is create an audio track. And I'm going to set my input to the microphone, which is input 3. I'm going to create a click track. I'm going to record enable, and I'm going to record. So here we go. I'm just going to set it to bars and beats so we're aware. Set it to quarter notes. You guys already know how to do all this shit, but here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? Our standard, beautiful counting thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, perfect. So this track was recorded on a mono audio track, but it's also the track that's been set to samples as its way of indicating where its position is in the timeline. So what do I mean by that? So this clip, this is an audio clip, right? This clip will always start at 2 seconds into the session, right? Have you ever wondered why whenever you change the tempo of the song, it doesn't change the speed of the actual track, right? If I change it from 120 to 180, right? It's still the same speed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And it's also, if I change it to something slower like 90, not only is it the same speed, but it starts at exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It starts exactly at 2 seconds, no matter where in the time, no matter where I put my metronome to, it's always going to start at 2 seconds into the timeline. So that's like kind of interesting, right? It's like, why wouldn't it change according to speed? And that's because it is a sample-based track, and sample-based tracks always reference the absolute time of the session. So the minutes and seconds of a session. That's how Pro Tools is programmed, right? Now, let's see what happens if we click on this and change it to ticks, right? So in ticks, we're not actually referencing the absolute time, minutes and seconds. We're referencing the bars and beats. So let's see what happens when we change the track to ticks and then change the tempo to something faster. Now, what happened? What did you see? You saw the audio shift sooner in the timeline, right? So now the audio is actually starting at 1 second and 333 milliseconds. So that's interesting. Well, let's take a listen to it. Does it sound faster? It starts earlier, so maybe it sounds faster. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nope, it does not sound faster at all. It sounds exactly the same. So it's like, huh, that's interesting. So what does ticks actually do? So ticks refers to the bars and beats of the session. This clip always starts at bar 2, beat 1 whenever the track is in ticks mode. So no matter what tempo I change to, even if it's something slower, this will always begin at bar 2, beat 1. You can see it right here. I can change the tempo again to something ridiculously fast, like 320. Again, it will always start. Oh, sorry. Change this tempo, I mean, to 320. It will always start at bar 2, beat 1 whenever you are in ticks mode. So you're like, well, okay, that's cool and all, but the tempo or the speed of the track is the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's cool that it's referring to the bars and beats, but the speed is the same. And we'll get into that, but this is actually where Elastic Audio comes into the picture, right? So the question is, if there are 44,100 samples per second whenever we are in samples mode, how many ticks make up a beat? And the answer is, let me just scroll this all the way up until it changes, and you'll see. Boom, right there. 960 samples per beat. So I'll do it again, all the way up to 900 and, oh, missed it, 60, right? So there's 44,100 samples per second, 960 ticks per beat. So there's way more samples than there are ticks, right? But that's the biggest thing that you have to know. When you're working in samples, the clip will always reference the absolute time, the minutes and seconds. Whereas if you're in ticks mode, it will always reference the bars and beats, because a clip needs to know when to start and when to stop. That's the whole purpose of all this, right? Because it doesn't make sense if you record something and it plays back, at a different time than when it was supposed to. That doesn't make any sense, right? So there you go. That's the difference between a sample-based track and a tick-based track. Now, actually, I wonder if I can, show a sub counter. Let me show you. I'll show you it this way so it makes more sense, right? So it's a sample-based track. We have a clip that starts at 2 seconds, i.e. bar 2, beat 1. If I increase the tempo of the project to something like 180, right? That means that technically the bars and beats get closer and closer together because they have to happen faster in time. But because it's a sample-based track, it will still start at 2 seconds, but it might start later in bars and beats, right? Hit OK. Boom. Still starts at 2 seconds, but it starts later in terms of bars and beats. Now it's on bar 2, beat 3, right? Whereas if it was a tick-based track and I change the tempo from 120 to 180, it will still be bar 2, beat 1, but then it'll be earlier in absolute time, right? Oh, I keep doing that fucking thing. Right? There you go. It's still bar 2, beat 1, but it's earlier in absolute time. I know this is kind of sounding pretty complicated and shit. Okay, now this is Ty, perfect. This leads into my next thing, which is like, when would you actually need to use this? This sounds like a very strange concept, right? So here's how you would want to use it. Now, the purpose of getting it into ticks mode is to have actual audio clips behave like MIDI information, because there are things you can do with MIDI that you can't do with audio without converting some aspects of audio. So a very simple thing that you can do with MIDI is that when the beat changes, when the tempo changes up here, the speed of the MIDI also changes. But we just found out that your audio clips don't change speed. No matter how much you change this tempo, it will always stay the exact same speed, right? It's kind of frustrating in a way. But here's where the beauty comes in, and I'll just put this back to 120, put this back to bar 2, beat 1. All right. Okay, so here's where the beauty comes in. Suppose I wanted to have this clip change speed with respect to the tempo of the project, right? This is something that we all wanted to do from the very first day of this. What I can do is I can set the track to a tick-based track, and then right next to this, you see this little empty slot over here. This is actually a Elastic Audio plugin slot. Elastic Audio actually allows you to change the tempo of your audio clip. This is the beauty of it. For the longest time, you couldn't separate pitch from speed, right? Because everything used to be done on tape machines and tape and all that stuff. So when you rotated the tape machines faster, yeah, it got faster, but then the pitch would also go up. That's not what we want, right? Or if you slowed it down, it would slow down the audio, but then the pitch of the audio would slow down. Elastic Audio is Pro Tools' way of separating pitch from speed. Super powerful tool, right? Now, granted, personally, I think Ableton does it better, but Pro Tools, you can still do it to a fair degree, right? So here's what we'll do. We change it to a tick-based track, and then to the very next slot, you can see when I click here, I have a bunch of different algorithms. Hannah, yeah, you agree, right? I have a bunch of different algorithms that I can choose from. These are all Elastic Audio algorithms, right? We're going to focus on these 4, right? Because Xform is basically just a rendered advanced version of Polyphonic. So these 4 algorithms can be used to change speed, right? Polyphonic, rhythmic, monophonic, and varispeed, right? So first off, let me just show you varispeed, because this emulates a tape machine in the sense that when I speed up the tempo, the audio will start to pitch up as well. So varispeed, you saw that it kind of grayed out for a second because it had to process the audio. So now, if I change from 120 to 180, check this out.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And it matches the tempo too. If I put the click track in.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Now the only thing is, I sound like a chipmunk, right? If I slow the tempo down to 100, my pitch is going to go down. And my speed is going to go down.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right? So that's what the old tape machines used to do, right? So it was kind of frustrating when you couldn't really separate them. But now what I want to do is, I want to, instead of varispeed, I want to use Elastic Audio, the algorithm called monophonic, and I want to separate my pitch. I want to leave the pitch alone, and I want to alter the speed. So I'm in ticks mode. I have my monophonic set up, algorithm set up, my Elastic Audio algorithm set up. Now, if I go to, say, let's change it to 150, right? You'll see that the speed changes, but the pitch doesn't. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Pitch is the same. See, this is the original. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll play something slower. 110. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Same pitch. Different tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ty, exactly. This is exactly right. Now, there's still some more for me to go through for you to do that, but yes, exactly, right? So there you go. I've kept the pitch exactly the same, but changed the speed of my counting. Now, this is called the monophonic algorithm, and you use that in a scenario where it's just one pitch at a time. So it's a vocal track. Vocals, for the most part, you can only produce one pitch at a time. I'm not talking about the Bobby McFerrins of the world. Shout out to anybody who knows what that is. Who that is, sorry. But usually you're dealing with one pitch at a time. Or if you think about a bass, for the most part, or if you think about lead guitar parts, right? So usually one pitch at a time. If you wanted to vary the speed without touching the pitch, you would use the monophonic algorithm. All right. So whenever you're done choosing whatever variation you want, you can actually just click on it, select none, and it will say, hey, do you want to commit to the changes you have made? You say commit, and now that's your new audio. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? So there you go. That is monophonic algorithm. Right? Now, what's actually happening is if you're wondering, well, how did it do that? So what's going on is that it's creating, hey, don't worry, be happy. There you go. What's going on is that Pro Tools is creating these warp markers within the audio and then stretching the audio or pushing it together based on the tempo of your choice. So if you ever look at your track, whatever track it is, and you go to waveform, right? You know about the playlist thing already, but once you have Elastic Audio, any Elastic Audio algorithm enabled on your track, you'll see two new options. One is called Analysis and one is called Warp. So when you go into Analysis, look what this is. You see a bunch of different lines across your vocal track. These are the points where Pro Tools pushes the audio together and separates them based on your speed, right? So if you have tempo slowing down to like 100, see how now the lines are much further separated out, or I'll go even slower to like 70, right? The lines are way more spaced out, as opposed to if I did back to 120, you can see that they're way closer together. So that's what Pro Tools uses to stretch and push audio tighter together. So Analysis just lets you see those warp markers. It actually also allows you to just double click and create your own if you want to, right? You can create your own and place them. Obviously, you can't move past the existing markers. You can also hold down Option and delete if you just hover over, right? I'm holding Option down, hover over one of the markers, and I just delete, right? So if you're trying to get back into Zoom, don't worry about that. Yeah, just stay on YouTube for now. I'll get back to you guys in Zoom in a second. So that's Analysis. Now, if you go into Warp mode, you can still see all the different lines, but here's the cool part is that you can actually start moving these around, but you got to be very careful, right? If you just select one and grab it, it's going to move the entire waveform and make it sound super weird. 1, 2, 3, right? Very strange. The correct way to do it is to hold Shift and then click. So then not only have you selected the marker that you want to move, but you've selected the two on either side of it so that the whole audio doesn't move. Only the point between the two selected points. This is very, very important. If you don't do it this way, you will affect the entire audio. So for example, if I wanted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I wanted 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So suppose I wanted 2 to come later, right? I'm just going to get rid of one of those. I wanted 2 to come a little later in the count. If I try to move this, it's going to change the entire thing. So I don't want that. So I hold Shift, click to create that boundary setting. And then I can actually move this to something else. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. You get the idea, right? So now you can kind of create your own patterns this way. It's pretty dope. Even though it looks kind of confusing, if you use it creatively, you can get some pretty dope results, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So maybe we should move 4 as well. So maybe I'll do, I'll go back to analysis. I'm just going to take the top of 4. Actually, I'm going to take the OR of 4. Hold shift, click, and I just want to go to the grid view. There you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now you can tell it's not perfect. It's like you can get some tiny weird artifacts whenever you do elastic audio, so you got to be very careful when you do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can also stretch out audio, like you can see that the 1 is already stretched out. Let's see if we can stretch something out. 4, 5. Let's do 5. 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? So we've altered the audio so much. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? Pretty dope what you can do. You can get really creative and like take verses and start to really kind of shift them around and stretch out. You know, I used to do this when I was like starting out. I don't do it anymore, but like, you know, I would like stretch out syllables and make it sound more sustained. But again, there's a limit, because if you do this too much, it can sound really bad, right? So be careful. I'm just going to go ahead and go to none and revert back to the original. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there is a breaking point, right? 1, 2, like if you, let's go back to 120. Ooh. 120, put that monophonic on it. Now here's what happens. If I slow it down to a ridiculous speed, like 100 is fine, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So it doesn't sound bad. It's a little artifacty, but it's passable in this context, right? It still sounds like the pitch is retained and the speed has changed, just like Verify and Audio Suite. Yes, exactly. Similar, very similar. But look what happens when I go down to something ridiculously slow, like 60. You'll hear it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's starting to sound choppy and glitchy, almost like when we're on Zoom and sometimes a connection error occurs, right? Let's go even slower. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? So it can get really glitchy in that kind of context. Now, if that's what you're going for, then awesome, do it. But just remember that it has its limitations too in terms of keeping audio clean and accurate. Exactly, Ty, exactly. There's not enough information between the stretching to make a decision for what should go there. That's exactly what's happening. Perfect, dude. So you're really getting this. Fuck yeah. All right. So that's monophonic for you. Let's go back to the just fine and look at what happens when we have a... actually, let's inactivate that too. When we have a beat. Now, just for the sake of it, I'm going to just consolidate that. Here we go. All right, so we've got a beat on a grid, and I'm pretty sure we found out the tempo to this, and we keep forgetting. I think it was like 65 or something, or 90. Oh, 170, I think. Yep, so 170. There you go. By the way, make sure you keep practicing how to get tempo like that. The faster you get at that, the better. Again, there are softwares out there that can help you find tempo, but these are just little tricks that you can use in the studio to, just show people that you're serious about this shit and you can get shit done. So anyway, we've got a beat and it's on this 170 tempo. And like Ty said, this is a perfect example. Oh, what's up, Luxon? You would play with that song when we're talking about elastic stretched out like a rubber band. Yeah. I wonder if that's what inspired this. But look, here's a scenario where the artist comes in and he's like, oh, this beat sounds really cool. Right? He's like, oh, this is cool. This is dope. But he's like, oh, man, but it's just kind of is dragging a little bit. I wish it was a little faster. And you say, well, not to worry, my good sir. I have a trick that I learned. If I go to my track, I'm good, dude. Thank you. Hope you're doing well, too. If I go to my track and change from samples to ticks, right next to it, I click and choose the polyphonic algorithm. Why polyphonic? Because poly means multiple. Phonic means sound or pitch, right? So multiple pitches happening at the same time. If I choose polyphonic, you see how it's grayed out and then it analyzes it and turns it back? It was analyzing it for warp markers, right? We already went over what warp markers are and what they do, right? Now that I have it in polyphonic, if I go to my tempo and I'm like, let's change this up to 180. There we go. Right? Now it's faster. Right? Faster, pitch is exactly the same, unaffected. Now, there are more advanced algorithms for polyphonic, specifically if you do it rendered, right? If you render it out, then it will probably play way better. Yeah, sounds better to me. Or even Xform, where it's completely rendered out. It's not something that happens in real time. Remember, all these inserts like EQ, compression, and even like the polyphonic algorithm, all of those things happen in real time. And Elastic Audio specifically is incredibly processor intensive because you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on and how to actually create the same pitch across different speeds, right? So for that reason, I don't recommend doing this a lot unless you are in a dire situation. And if you need to do it, maybe do it through Xform. But you can see even like my computer's pretty stacked out, but even with a stacked out computer, a full track on Xform is going to take quite a while to do. You can see that there's a little delay rotating thing going on. So again, I don't recommend it. Instead, what I would do is if you're in a pinch and you're like, well, the artist is here and I can't get the producer on the phone to actually send a sped up version of the track, what I would do is I would change the track to ticks, go polyphonic, and then play around. This is the original tempo. And then the artist is like, oh, I want it a little faster. Do 180. Now, the other issue is that when you're doing stuff like Elastic Audio, like I said, you kind of you're putting a lot of processing power on your machine. And again, this is a situation where I have a pretty solid computer. Like it barely ever has any issues, right? Fucking solid. Now I am opening up Pro Tools, streaming on YouTube, Zoom is open, talking to you through the interface, right? And on top of that, trying to do intense Elastic Audio. It's like I'm pushing the limits of this, right? So be careful in how you use this thing. So you can use this as a way to kind of get by. And even what you can do is if the artist is like, okay, 180, that's perfect. You can then click on the little side note and then just commit to the change. And now you're not doing any real-time elastic audio. You've committed to the change that you made. Right? Now the artist can actually track over this, and then when the producer gets a second, he can send you the actual track with the proper speed change. Don't use this as your fundamental thing for mixing, right? A lot of these guys. Hey, we're on YouTube. I'll send you a link. Hold on.
Bet. Thank you. I just got back home. My bad.
All good. All good. There you go. All right.
She's Tommy the fuck out.
Anyway, make sure you mute yourself. I don't want to hear any personal shit. All right. So that's how you speed up and slow down a track without affecting the pitch. Really, really cool tool that you can have in your back pocket, right? Personally, elastic audio is something I rarely ever need to bust out and use, right? Rarely. That being said, there are these times where it's like the artist is in a situation or the session is in a situation where you need like some kind of weird tactic, and these are one of your weird tactics that you can actually use to keep the session going. Like there's like a last case, all bets are off, Hail Mary kind of situation, right? So this is a really good thing to know. Now let's revert back to what it was. I believe we were at 170. Now let's get the vocal track and let's play out this scenario.
So I guess the thought of you's just fine. Just fine, baby.
So now here's a scenario. Here's another scenario where the song is tracked, vocals. We did all the vocal comping and everything. You guys remember all that? We took a bunch of different takes, comped them, made one final playlist, one final comp over here, right? And now, right as we're starting to finish up, the artist is like, hey, just out of curiosity, I want to know what this would sound like if it was a little bit more sped up. And first of all, you look at him like, what? What the fuck is your problem, right? That's the first thing you should probably say. And then what you say is, no problem. You go to each track and make sure it's changed from samples to ticks, right? The first one, you choose polyphonic. I just be watching the best damn shows in here. Okay. The second one is monophonic because it's a vocal, right? So it's analyzing the vocal track when it's grayed out, and once it turns back blue, it's analyzed and done all the warp markers. And double click on the tempo. Go to let's do 175.
My mind. So I guess the thought of you's just fine.
So now you can listen to what it sounds like slightly faster.
My mind.
There you go. That's an example of it breaking down.
And
So that didn't work out too well. I'm also doing a lot of processing, so that might be why. Let me just revert this back. But you get the idea, right? This works better if you're not doing 10.
guarantee.
Works way better when you're not doing 10 different processes. Reality TV, SAE. Okay. I hope nothing's going on in my place. Is it like somebody's trying to kill me or something? Yeah, wouldn't that be the creepiest thing? Is if I'm teaching a lesson, you guys are on YouTube, somebody comes up with a knife or something behind me, and you can't say anything because you're all typing shit. Well, I guess you could be on Zoom. That'd be the creepiest thing right now. All right. Jesus fucking Christ. All right. So there you go. That's a really cool way where you can start to use elastic audio to your advantage. Now, here's another thing that you can do. Let's take this track, this vocal track, change it to monophonic elastic audio, click on waveform, and go to warp. Let's see if we can actually change some shit around. Maybe I want to change the pacing of this and I.
Never said guarantee. I shouldn't speak so loud. No. And I said,
So maybe if I hold shift, click, move this.
oh no,
Oh, my computer's just not having it today.
oh no. And I
So I shifted over to polyphonic because it's a much more advanced algorithm. It's a slightly more advanced algorithm than monophonic. And you can do that if you need to. Don't have to stick to traditional standards.
shouldn't speak so loud. No. And I
So you see that? Before, this is what the audio. So hold on. This is the before audio,
shouldn't speak so loud. No. And I
right? And then after, you can do.
shouldn't speak so loud. No. And I say too much.
You can kind of create your own little patterns, right? If you wanted to.
I just fine, babe. I just fine, babe.
So here's another example. I will go to analysis and get rid of this guy. Just fine, babe.
I just fine, babe. I just fine, babe.
And let's put this babe on something else.
I just fine, babe.
You see what I mean? You can start fucking around with shit.
I just fine, babe.
Woo!
So I
So you get the idea, right? You can get all kinds of stuff going. It's pretty dope. Again, Elastic Audio is not only a complicated thing to understand, it's not very intuitive, especially in Pro Tools. And it's also, I will admit, I rarely ever have to use Elastic Audio. Ever, right? But it is something cool to know. It's something to have in your back pocket in case of these little niche scenarios, right? It's pretty dope, right?
stretched out like a rubber band. She already got a master plan, waiting for me to find out what's in store.
Maybe we can even extend that. Let's see if we can stretch that out. So go to analysis, create, double click over here to create a marker. Sure, we'll leave that as is. Go back to warp, shift click so that everything is selected within a boundary. Let's stretch this out a little.
Waiting for me to find out what's in store.
And maybe we'll move this guy over here.
What's in store? What's in store? To find out what's in store.
You know what I mean?
For me to find out what's in store.
So you get the idea. You can have a lot of fun with this. Again, you might be wondering, well, why don't you just do simple editing? And you can do stuff like shifting words around with editing, but you can't stretch words out and you can't make words tighter with simple editing. So Elastic Audio is the way to go in that. Now again, be very, very careful as to what you do because there is a point after which Elastic Audio starts to break down. So for example, let me stretch this out to a ridiculous amount.
For me to find out what's in store.
Right? It breaks down. It doesn't work. So you have to use it sparingly and you have to use it smartly and wisely. So be careful on that stuff. Do that on something else.
Plan.
Oh,
Waiting for me to find.
I did. So there you go.
Tryna get you some. Tryna get you some. Tryna get you some. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to run. Well, I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now. Never said guarantee. I shouldn't speak so loud.
Oh, I already did this section.
It's just fine. I just fine.
So here's an example of fine, yeah. This whole thing is fine, yeah, right?
Fine.
I want to stretch it out, but there's no marker over here. So I go back to my section over here. Yeah, not only auto-tuney, but it's like almost glitchy, like zoomy, like zoom audio-y. So I go to warp, click on analysis right over here, go from warp to analysis, and then I choose where I want to create the marker.
Fire,
So fine, yeah.
fire,
So I click it, maybe it's right over here. So I created a new marker, go back to warp, and let's just see what happens.
I just fire, 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 I just fire.
Right? So you can get kind of creative with this stuff. You get the idea. Instead of, "I just fine, yeah."
I just fire,
You get the idea. It's not perfect, but it's a fucking cool way to actually be creative, right? Especially when you can't get the artist back into the studio.
I just find it so I just find it so odd. Well, I say too much of what's on my mind.
Now, that being said, you guys know that you can also do this with the beat. Now, this is less so an issue because, well, let's face it. Let me just save this just in case. Commit. So this is less so a problem because, like, if you need to alter a beat, the first thing you have to do, and the only thing you should do, is contact the producer and have him change something and then send it back. Whether it's pitch, speed, shifting kicks, or whatever. But, again, if you're in a pickle, let's go to the beat, change it to polyphonic algorithm.
Stretched out like a rubber.
Let's listen to this. So what's an example? See, this is supposed to be 170, right? Oh, wait, hold on. Turn this off. The original tempo is 170. All right, so suppose, all right, you have the beat over here. It's a 170 tempo. Suppose you wanted to change it so that it's a little bit more on grid, right? So suppose you wanted to move this to the grid. Change it to polyphonic, go to warp mode, shift click, move. Right? Or if you want to move this around. Ooh, that's kind of cool. So actually, let me do this. I'm going to... Actually, here's what I'll do. I'll go to analysis, create another point so that this isn't affected. You have to kind of get a little smart about how do you want to affect things. So I've just changed the beat. So let me do that again. Go to analysis. Da-da-do-do-da-da, right? Da-da-do. Create a marker. Da-da-do-do. Go back to warp. Shift click. Whoa. So I've changed the beat, essentially. See, that's not the original beat. You guys remember the original beat, right? So the original is... Right? But I made... Right? So it's kind of cool. You can get really fucking cool with this shit. Anyway, it's a super fun tool. It's something that you can use very, very sparingly. But don't go crazy because then it'll really start to break down pretty badly. All right. So now, in the context of all of that, I want to go over one last thing that Elastic Audio can be good for. So let's save this. Balls. I want it to save as Elastic Audio. All right. So now let's go to Sharpanjo. So this is a session where you got some drums, right? Let's check it out. So very poorly played, out of time drums, right? If you listen to the click track, you'll hear how bad it is. And why the fuck? I'm going to put it back to factory default. Right, so you can tell the timing's pretty bad. Hence the name Sharpanjo. So you got a drum session up here with kick, snare, hats, toms, and then room microphones, right? These are like, you know, when you track drums with microphones up against the shells, like the individual drums, but also you create, or you set up microphones to create the overall picture, like overheads, room microphones, far room mics if you have them. Very, very common, right? Now in this particular case, I'm actually going to mute these and let's actually just I won't get rid of them, but let's just mute them for now. And let's just listen to the plain drums, right? Now because it's so soft, I'm going to create, I'm just going to add a limiter so that we can actually hear it a little better. Beautiful, beautifully bad, right? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to mute the room microphones because I want to explain this with just the raw mics. It'll make way more sense, right? Then I'm going to go to my grid up here, and I don't know what this grid setting is, but I think it's samples. I want to change it from samples to bars and beats, and quarter notes is fine. You guys know how to do that. Tempo is 115. So let's take a look at this and see what we're doing. And if I go to this little thing up here on the top left, if I press the up arrow, I can actually see the waveforms a lot more clearly, right? It's just a good thing to do. It doesn't change the volume, but it does change the visuals. And I'm going to choose eighth notes because it looks like hi-hats are on eighth notes. Right? So you got kick drum up here, snare drum, and hi-hats over here. Now let's see what's going on. If I zoom in, you can see that a lot of it is not on the grid, right? It's kind of missing it. Now there's nothing wrong with being off the grid, but the problem is, one, if you're not really experienced as a drummer, you're going to sound like you don't know what you're doing. But also, if you're not giving that kind of push and pull effect to, like, you know, really feel out the song, then it's going to sound super messy. You're going to sound inconsistent and horrible, really. So one thing you could do is you can actually use Elastic Audio to set all these things straight. Now, it doesn't work fully in the context of this because you have room microphones and all. And yes, yeah, I get it. Like, authenticity, you don't want to be super on the grid. I totally agree. But this just sounds messy as fuck, right? Like, it's one thing to, like, be kind of, like, pushing and pulling, like, with the song and the tempo and the vibe. It's another thing to just be all over the place, like this. So if you wanted to fix that, you can do that with Elastic Audio. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change all of these, at least all these three, from samples mode to ticks mode, right? So if I select all of them, I can actually just hold Shift Option and just change them all at once, right? That's with anything related to the tracks. Like if you want to set the inputs together, it's just Shift Option, right? They all change once they're selected. Then I'm going to change all of them to a rhythmic Elastic Audio algorithm. So we already did vari-speed, monophonic, and polyphonic, but rhythmic is specifically for drums and percussion, right? So now that we have the rhythmic algorithm set up, what I can do is I can go look at the warp mode for all of these, and you can see that the lines, the warp markers, are exactly where the hits are. So the rhythmic algorithm is pretty solid. It's probably the most solid of all of them, right? Because it detects transients and puts a marker right at the top. So what does that mean? Well, it means that I can shift, click, and move shit to the grid, right? You can see that I'm moving all of these to the grid, right? You get the idea. But I'm tightening it up, right? Really awesome. Now look, this is a very inefficient way of doing it because, well, I'm not going to go manually one by one and try to fix this thing. That's just ridiculous. But here's the beauty. Because we're in TIX mode and because we're on the rhythmic algorithm, there's a really cool quantization function that you can apply to audio. And this works best with rhythmic and percussive type of instruments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, don't do the whole song. Do not do that because you have to check in increments of time. If you do the whole song, it'll accrue a lot of errors and it'll get worse and worse and worse. So just do it a bit at a time. So I'm just going to choose the first 4 bars, right? How do I know it's 4 bars? Well, bar 2 to bar 6. And also, you can see up here, the length of the selection is 4 bars, right? So I've selected 4 bars right here. Now what I can do is I can go to event, go to event operations, go to quantize, and the shortcut is option 0, but that 0 is on the numeric pad, not your 0 on your regular keyboard, right? But when I open up the quantize menu, it gives me the option to quantize elastic audio events. These are all elastic audio tick-based tracks. So I can quantize these. If you don't know what quantize is, basically what it means is if you have a grid and if you have, say, a MIDI note that's off the grid, quantize will put it so that it starts and or ends on a grid. Very, very useful to make things tight and locked in, if that's what you're going for. But now that I've converted these to tick-based rhythmic algorithm tracks, I can treat these almost like I can MIDI. So this is, again, back to the beauty of elastic audio, right? So what do I want to quantize? Well, I want to quantize elastic audio events. What's the quantization grid? Now, I already chose 8th notes because the hi-hats are going at 8th notes, right? You can see every hi-hat is happening at an 8th note. So I changed from 16th notes to 8th notes. And I want to quantize the note on. That just means whenever the audio hits, and preserve the note duration. Absolutely. Finally, I just have to hit apply, but I want you guys to see this. So watch what happens. Look specifically at, remember, this is the grid. This is where the kick drum is. The grid is here. This is where the hi-hat is. This is the grid. This is where the hi-hat starts. Grid, snare starts, right? They're all off the grid. But when I hit quantize, watch what happens. Or when I hit apply, rather. 1, 2, 3. See that? Now they're all locked in. Way tighter. Right? So let's go to the next few bars. So bar 6. Let's choose the next 4 bars. Now look at that. There's toms in this. So what do I have to do? I have to make sure that these are also set to ticks and rhythmic. Also, I want to see the warp. And let's do this, right? One, 2, 3. See that? Let's hope these get it. Right? And this is afterwards. But you hear the difference now? So if I go back to what it was before, right? And now, way tighter. Right? Now, it might be, so for example, let's see what this next one is. So let's do this next one and see how if it gets it right or not. So let's just do that much, right? How much is that? That's 2 bars. 1, 2, 3, apply. Oh, it did get it. Now, let's try the next part. Let's do the next couple of bars. I'm going to risk it and do 8 bars, right? So that's an example of where it went wrong, right? Because the original is, so it's more of a triplet vibe, right? So what I could do is I could quantize up to this point, say, let's do 1 bar. And now this triplet, you can go in here and choose 8th notes, but choose triplets. Sorry, there we go. Triplets. See if it works. See that? Way better. And obviously you'll have to quantize the part afterwards, but you get the idea. Right? Now, again, you want to do this slowly, section by section, because there will be errors. So I always go like 4 bars at a time. Like when I got 8 bars and I went cocky, it didn't work out for me, right? So there you go. Now, if for some reason something doesn't quantize correctly, you can always go in and manually move them around. But looks like it's working so far, right? Solid. Now those hi-hats, we didn't get those. So let's highlight them. Boom. Right? Pretty cool, right? So this, I believe this is one of the assignments, this Sharp Pan Joe. It's really, really good to practice this stuff because it just helps you in editing in general. Now, I recommend doing this without the room microphones because these are distracting and it becomes a little bit more complicated that way. But for now, actually, let's see what happens if we quantize with the overheads. I'm hesitant to do that, but let's just see what happens. Warp. So I wouldn't recommend doing it because it gets a little distracting, especially with like room mics and, you know, reflections and stuff. So don't use these last 3. Just use the first 6, right? You can even color them differently if you want to separate them out. Anyway, that's probably what you'll do tomorrow if we don't get into MIDI. So let's take it back to a zoom, zoom, zoom.